Snow came sideways through ironclad valley, hard as thrown gravel, turning the main road into a brown river of slush and horse dung. Eleanor Hart lay in it on one knee. Her shawl had dragged loose. Wet cloth clung to the left side of her face where the fire had taken the skin and left the rest pulled tight and shiny beneath the soot. She tried to gather the cloth back up, but her fingers would not close right. Too much cold. Too much blood in the mud. All around her boots formed a ring. Miners, shopkeepers, wives with hard mouths, boys too young to shave but old enough to spit. Look at her, somebody called. Burned her own house and missed herself. A laugh went through them. Not loud at first. Then stronger once folks found safety in hearing others do it. Mayor Sterling stood on the boardwalk beneath the barbershop awning, dry under black wool silver watch chain laid neat across his belly. His eyes did not leave Eleanor. This woman robbed Ironclad Valley, he said, stole property, set flame to her own place to bury the crime, then cried madness when caught. Eleanor lifted her head. One eye showed beneath the ruined cloth. The other side of her face did not move much anymore. "You know what you bought?" she said. Her voice was raw, but it cut through the storm. Sterling's smile stayed put. "I know what you are." A man behind Eleanor kicked her ribs. She folded forward one palm, sinking into the freezing mud. The taste of iron filled her mouth. Her burnt cheek struck slush and stuck there for half a breath. The crowd drew closer. A little girl hid behind her mother's skirt. The mother turned the child's face away, not from the beating, but from Eleanor. That was the cut that went deepest. Buck Ransom Sterling's lead hand stepped into the road with a coiled bullwhip in his fist. He was broad, red-bearded, and drunk enough to enjoy work that paid in screams. He leaned down and gripped Eleanor by the back of her dress, hauling her upright like a sack of meal. The torn cloth fell from her face. The ring of people pulled back at once. A woman made a small choking sound. A boy laughed, then stopped when nobody joined him. Eleanor did not cover herself. Her hands hung at her sides, mud dripping from her fingers. Buck grinned. "There she is." He raised the whip. The leather uncoiled black and wet its tip, twitching in the wind. Eleanor looked past him, past Sterling, past the lit windows and shuttered doors, past all the faces that had once come to her for salve, lamp oil, fever powders, and blasting chalk. No one stepped forward. Buck's arm came down. A hand caught his wrist. The crack never came. For one breath, the whole town heard only the storm and the groan of frozen signs swinging above the street. Then Buck screamed. Harlan Voss stood behind him, tall under a hat white with snow, his coat hanging open, a rifle slung across his back. His face was lean, unshaved, and marked by old weather. Folks knew that face. They crossed roads to avoid it. The killer from Gallows Peak. Harlan twisted. Bone snapped. Buck dropped to his knees, his whip falling useless into the muck. His scream went thin, then broke apart. Harlan let him fall. No hurry, no speech. Just that big gloved hand opening like Buck had been nothing but a bad tool set down. Sterling took one step off the boardwalk. "Harlan Voss," he said, "you best remember where you stand." Harlan bent, picked up Eleanor's soaked shawl, and set it around her shoulders. His fingers brushed the burnt side of her jaw. He did not flinch. He did not stare. "Can you stand?" he asked. Eleanor's throat worked once. "Yes." "Then do it." She planted one boot under herself. The first try failed. Her knee slid. Harlan caught her elbow. Not soft, not gentle. Firm enough to lend his bones to hers. Together they rose. The town shifted back. Rifles appeared in doorways. A shotgun barrel eased from the feed store window. Somewhere a horse stamped and blew steam into the white dark. Harlan turned slow, taking in every muzzle, every face, every coward standing close enough to watch a woman whipped and far enough to call it justice. His voice came low. Then it filled the street. Any man takes one more step to touch her, he stays on this mountain forever. No one moved. Even the snow seemed to strike softer. Sterling's jaw tightened, but his eyes had gone to Buck, curled in the mud, with his broken arm hugged to his chest. Harlan guided Eleanor toward the north road. Behind them, Ironclad Valley watched with loaded guns and shut mouths. Ahead, Gallows Peak rose black through the storm, and two outcasts had just declared war on a town that owned every bullet, every badge, and every grave. By the time they reached Gallows Peak, Eleanor's boots had gone stiff with ice. Harlan's cabin leaned against the mountain like it had lost an argument with winter and stayed standing out of spite. The roof sagged. One shutter hung by a nail. Smoke crawled from the stovepipe in a thin gray line and got torn away by the wind. Inside, the place smelled of wet wool, cold ash, old gun oil, and pine sap burning too green. Harlan shut the door with his shoulder and dropped the bar across it. Eleanor stood near the stove, shaking so hard, the floorboards ticked beneath her boots. Snow melted off her dress and made dark circles around her feet. Harlan pulled a chair out with one hand. "Sit." She looked at him. "I ain't broke. You're bleeding." "So are you." He glanced down. Blood had soaked through his sleeve where Buck's knife had found him in the scuffle before the broken wrist. Harlan had kept it hidden under his coat all the way up the mountain. Now it ran black in the lamplight and dripped from his fingertips. He took a rag from a nail, pressed it to the cut, and tied it wrong. Eleanor watched him fumble twice. Then she crossed the room, snatched the rag from his hand, and shoved him down into the chair. "Hold still." Harlan's eyes narrowed. "I said, hold still, Mr. Voss." That stopped him. She moved through the cabin like she owned every inch of it, though she had never seen it before. From a cracked shelf, she took a bottle of corn liquor. From a tin near the stove, salt. From a bundle hanging by the door, dried yarrow and shepherd's purse gone brittle as straw. Harlan watched her grind the weeds with the butt of his own knife. "You a doctor, no?" She poured liquor over the wound. His jaw locked. His knuckles whitened on the chair arm. She packed the crushed herb into the cut and wrapped it tight with torn cloth from her undersleeve. "Doctor would charge you $3 and tell you to pray. This will work better." Blood slowed. Harlan looked from his arm to her hands. Those hands were burned in places, scarred, nails split, but they did not shake now. "Who taught you that?" "My father kept a mining camp alive with boiled water weeds and stubbornness. I learned what kept men breathing." She turned from him and reached beneath her scorched bodice. Harlan looked away at once. "Don't flatter yourself," she said. A small sound broke from his chest. Not quite a laugh. Eleanor pulled out half a leather notebook, blackened along one side, pages warped from heat and water. She held it close a moment before setting it on the table. The room changed. The stove popped. Snow scratched at the shutter. Somewhere deep in the mountain, timber groaned under the cold. Harlan leaned forward. On the pages were numbers, ratios, diagrams, chemical marks written in a sharp, narrow hand. Some lines had burned clean away. Others remained dark and plain. "What is that?" "The reason Sterling wants me dead." She turned a page with care. "This here is blasting powder made steady. Less smoke. Less misfire. Safer in damp rock. I spent 4 years testing it in washpans, stove kettles, and mine cuts no sane man would crawl into." Harlan said nothing. She tapped one page. "Sterling bought cheap powder from a Denver broker, full of sulfur trash and wet nitrate. I warned him. He used it anyway." Her finger moved to a burned edge. North Finch shaft fell 2 months later. 31 men inside. 12 came out. Harlan's face hardened, but his gaze stayed on the book. "Folks said bad timber. Folks say what the mayor pays them to say." She opened to the last saved page. A folded bill of sale had been stitched into the binding, half charred, still readable. Sterling's name sat there in ink. Harlan took off his hat and set it on the table like a thing unfit for the room. He burned your place for this. He burned my place because I would not sell it. Then he called me thief before the smoke quit rising. Eleanor lifted the lamp chimney and turned up the flame. Light struck the ruined side of her face, the stretched skin, the red seams, the part of her mouth that no longer bent right. She did not cover it. Harlan looked at the notebook instead. Not away from her. At the work. At the weapon. Outside Ironclad Valley sat below them with its guns and badges and church bells. Inside, Harlan Voss saw that he had not dragged a wounded woman from the mud. He had brought home the one thing Mayor Sterling could not hang by or bury. Sterling's riders came before sunup. Harlan heard them first. Not the horses. The iron. Spurs striking rock under the snow. Rifle slings creaking. Men trying to move quiet and failing at it. He stood at the cabin window with his Winchester-loaded jaw dark with stubble, one sleeve stiff from dried blood. Down below, lanterns bobbed through the timber. 1, 5, 10, more. 20, he said. Eleanor sat at the table with the burned notebook open, her good eye fixed on the tree line. They come for the book. They come to burn the cabin. Same thing. Harlan worked the rifle lever. You stay low. Eleanor shut the notebook. The sound was small. It made him turn. No, this ain't a church meeting. No, Mr. Voss. It is a problem of distance, wind panic, and poor judgment. That makes it mine. He stared at her. Outside, a man laughed in the dark below. Come on out, Harlan, a voice called. Mayor says we can bring the woman back in pieces if need be. Harlan stepped for the door. Eleanor caught his coat. Give me 1 hour. You got 10 minutes. Then quit wasting them. She moved fast. From behind the stove, she dragged a sack of farm powder Harlan used on his poor patch of beans. From the shed, she had him bring coal dust, old lamp oil, hog fat gone rancid, in a crock-rusted copper tubing wire nails, and 3 cracked blasting caps he had taken years ago and never trusted. Harlan watched her hands sort trash into purpose. She marked the snow with a broken spoon. Not far. Not near. Here. There. Behind that stump. Under the wash line. By the split pine. Every mark set where a boot would go when a proud man rushed uphill thinking fear lived in the cabin. No ratios, she muttered to herself. No full force. Noise, smoke, ground break, flash. That's supposed to comfort me, it's supposed to keep your roof on. They worked in the dark while snow cut their faces raw. Harlan buried what she pointed at and asked no fool questions. Eleanor ran wire through frozen grass and hollow reeds, packed smoke pots in old bean tins, tied copper tubes under deadfall, then rubbed soot across every bright piece. Twice she had to stop and press her palm to her ribs. Twice Harlan reached for her. Twice she slapped his hand away. By gray light, Gallows Peak looked empty. Then the mercenaries came. They wore city coats and cartridge belts, faces tucked in scarves, rifles ready. Their leader, a thick man with yellow gloves, raised a hand. Cabin's quiet. Maybe Voss ran, another said. Maybe the witch froze. They laughed. Eleanor crouched beside the stove, one hand wrapped around a plunger box made from a clock spring telegraph scrap and a prayer she did not speak. Harlan knelt by the window. Wait, she said. The first men crossed the split pine. Wait, a boot crushed the buried wire. Eleanor pushed. The slope opened with a flat, hard bark. Snow leapt 10 feet high. Smoke rolled black and greasy across the ground. Horses screamed below. Men cursed, fired blind, and threw themselves behind trees that had already been chosen for them. A second charge snapped under the deadfall. The log kicked loose, not enough to kill enough to send 4 armed men sliding down the ice like sacks of grain. Harlan's mouth parted. Eleanor did not look at him. Left. He fired through the window, striking a rifle from a man's hand. Lower. He fired again. The smoke pots took next. Thick yellow-gray clouds poured between the trees, bitter with coal and fat, making eyes stream and throats seize. Men stumbled out coughing, tearing scarves from their mouths, shooting at ghosts. Their leader yelled, "Push through!" He got 3 steps. A copper tube shrieked from under the snow and spat flame across his boots. He dropped his rifle and danced backward, arms windmilling, pride gone clean out of him. That broke them. 1 ran, then 5. Then all of Sterling's hired guns were scrambling downhill, falling over one another, leaving hats, rifles, and bloodless courage in the snow. Harlan stepped onto the porch, rifle lowered. Eleanor came beside him with ash on her hands and lamp oil on her skirt. The ruined side of her face shone pale in the cold morning. Below, the last mercenary vanished into the timber. Harlan looked at the quiet field she had made. Then the valley bell began to ring. Not once, again and again. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the burned notebook. "That ain't surrender," she said. The bell kept ringing until noon. Not for fire, not for church. Each hard stroke came up the mountain, thin and cold, crawling through the pines until it found the cabin walls. Harlan stood outside with the spyglass to his eye. Eleanor waited behind him, the burned notebook tucked beneath her arm. Smoke from the ruined traps still hung low among the trees, sour with coal and hog fat. "What do you see?" she asked. Harlan did not answer. She took the glass from him. Ironclad Valley lay small and ugly below its main square, packed tight with bodies. Not armed riders this time. Women. Children. Old men. Miners with their caps in their hands. Sterling had penned them inside the assay yard behind stacked crates and oil barrels. His deputies stood round them with rifles. Buck Ransom, arm-bound in a sling, held a torch near the barrels and grinned up at the mountain as if he knew she could see him. A board had been nailed above the yard gate. "Voss by sundown, or they burn." Eleanor lowered the glass. The cold bit at the wet tracks on her face before she knew they were there. "No," she said. Harlan took the spyglass back slow. "They ain't bluffing. There are children in there. I saw. We can cut down the north ridge. Come in from behind the storehouse. If I can get close enough to the barrels—" "No." Her head snapped toward him. No, Harlan's eyes stayed on the valley. "There's 50 guns between here and them. Then we use smoke. Wind's wrong. Then we wait till dark. Sundown comes first." She stepped in front of him. "You do not get to decide this alone." His mouth moved once like there were words behind his teeth, and each one had barbs. Then he turned back into the cabin. Eleanor followed. He set a cup of coffee by the stove, black and steaming. His hands were too steady. That was what made her look twice. "Harlan, drink." "You're shaking." I said no. He reached behind the flour sack and brought out her father's old medicine vial, the one she had used for pain after the burns, nearly empty now. Eleanor looked from the vial to the cup. Her fingers curled around the notebook. "You wouldn't." He would not meet her eye. She threw the coffee at the wall. Too late. His other hand came up with a cloth. The smell hit sharp, laudanum and liquor. She drove her elbow into his ribs. He grunted, but held on. The chair went over. The notebook slapped the floor. Eleanor clawed for it, boots scraping, breath tearing through the cloth. "Harlan, don't you dare!" His arm locked around her like iron. "Live," he said against her hair. She kicked backward and caught his shin. He did not let go. "Let me go. You're the only one can finish this. Not without you." His chest stopped moving for one beat. Then he laid her down on the floorboards as her hands lost their grip. The last thing she saw was him picking up the burned notebook and setting it beneath the loose plank by the stove. When Eleanor woke, the cabin had gone blue with dusk. Her mouth tasted of copper and old medicine. Her limbs dragged heavy. She pushed herself upright, struck the overturned chair, then crawled to the window. The spyglass waited on the sill. No. Her hand shook so hard she nearly dropped it. Down in Ironclad Valley, torches burned around the square. The assay yard stood open. The hostages were alive, huddled near the church steps, guarded but breathing. In the center of the street, Harlan knelt beneath the gallows. His shirt was torn. Blood darkened one side of his face. His hands were tied behind him. A rope hung around his neck, thick and new. Sterling stood beside him in a clean coat, smiling for the crowd. Eleanor pressed the glass so hard to her eye the brass cut her brow. Sterling lifted his cane and pointed toward Gallows Peak. His lips shaped words she could not hear. Then Buck Ransom kicked Harlan in the back, and the rope snapped tight enough to make Eleanor's fingers go numb. The sun touched the ridge. Sundown had come. The gallows lever screamed. Every face in Ironclad Valley tilted toward the rope. Harlan did not close his eyes. He looked past Sterling, past Buck, past the rows of rifles and tight mouths toward the black shoulder of Gallows Peak. The trap beneath him kicked once. Then nothing. A flash split under the scaffold. Iron hinges sheared clean away with a white snap. Bolts screamed off into the mud. The boards dropped crooked, not down, not enough to take him. Smoke rolled out under Harlan's boots, sharp and blue, and the whole gallows shuddered like a struck animal. The rope slackened. Harlan hit one knee on solid planks, coughing alive. For 3 breaths, nobody moved. Then Sterling spun toward the street. At the far end of town, Eleanor Hart walked through the smoke. No shawl, no veil. The burned half of her face took the firelight plain. Her hair hung loose and wet from melted snow. Her dress was torn at the hem. Around her waist sat a belt of wrapped charges, wired to a brass switch, gripped in her right hand. Men lifted rifles. Eleanor raised the switch. The barrels dipped. One deputy stepped back so fast his heel broke through the boardwalk. Eleanor did not hurry. Her boots struck mud, then frozen ruts, then the plank steps of the gallows. She climbed with one hand on the rail and the other holding death quiet as a hymn book. Sterling's cane trembled once before he stilled it. "You pull that," he said, "you die with us." Eleanor looked at him with her one good eye. "I've been dying since you lit that match." She knelt by Harlan and cut the rope with the small blade from her boot. The fibers parted one by one. Harlan's bound hands flexed. Blood ran from his brow to his chin. "You drugged me," she said. His split lip pulled faintly. "You came anyway." "Fool man, sharp woman." She cut his wrists free. Buck Ransom lurched up the steps, good hand reaching for her hair. Eleanor's thumb pressed the switch halfway. A spark cracked under the gallows, bright as a devil's tooth. Buck froze. His face drained gray. "Go on," she said. He backed down. Eleanor stood and threw the burned notebook into the mud at the feet of the miners. Pages spilled open. Wind flipped them, showing numbers, blast marks, mine diagrams, letters, the charred bill of sale with Sterling's name still black on cream paper. "You buried your dead under a lie," Eleanor said. Sterling laughed too loud. "Mad woman's scratches." Eleanor pointed toward the old men near the church steps. What color was the smoke when North Finch fell, a miner with a white beard swallowed? Yellow. Yellow because that powder was cut foul. Sulfur waste, wet nitrate, clay binder to make cheap weight. It burns dirty, hangs low, bites the lungs before the rock gives. A woman clapped both hands over her mouth. Eleanor turned a page with her boot. "I wrote Sterling on March 7th. Told him that batch would flash hot at the drill face. Told him the south seam would gas. Told him men would choke before they could crawl." The white-bearded miner bent, picked up the burned letter, and read by torchlight. His hand began to shake. "My boy was in that shaft," he said. Sterling's smile thinned. Eleanor's voice carried down the street hard enough to strike wood. "He bought death cheap, then burned my shop to steal the powder that would have saved them." A sound moved through the crowd. Boots turning, hands closing on pick handles, women pulling children behind them. Sterling backed toward his deputies. "Guns up," he snapped. The deputies raised their rifles, but the barrels wavered between Eleanor Harlan and the miners stepping into the street. Harlan took Eleanor's left hand. She kept the switch raised in her right. Sterling still had men with bullets. But for the first time, Ironclad Valley had heard the truth, and every loaded gun in the square had to choose what kind of blood it served. For a long breath, the square held still. Snow hissed in the torch flames. Mud dripped from the broken gallows. Every rifle barrel shook, though no man would own it. Sterling lifted his cane toward Eleanor. "Shoot her." No shot came. His mouth tightened. "I gave an order." A voice answered from above the hotel porch, and I heard it. Every head turned. A gray-bearded man in a cavalry coat stood on the balcony. Beside him were two soldiers with carbines held low. "Colonel Abram Whitcomb." Sterling's face changed quicker than weather. "Colonel," he said, "you were not expected until morning. I came when your hired men ran past my camp missing rifles and scents." Whitcomb came down the stairs. Nobody spoke. Even Buck Ransom lowered his eyes. Sterling forced a smile. "This woman is a criminal. Voss here is wanted for killing a man. You have stepped into town business." Whitcomb stopped at the broken gallows and looked at Eleanor. Then at the clean-cut hinges under Harlan's boots. Then at the blue stain left on the iron. "Ma'am," he said, "did you set that charge?" Eleanor's thumb stayed on the brass switch. "I did. Meaning to kill, meaning to cut iron and spare flesh." The colonel crouched and scraped soot from the hinge. He smelled it, rubbed it between thumb and finger, then looked at the notebook in the mud. Sterling's cane struck the plank. "That book is forged." Whitcomb picked it up. Water had spotted the pages. Fire had eaten the edges. Still the figures were clear. The same figures Sterling had copied and sold as his own. The colonel looked at Sterling. "You sent me samples last week." Sterling swallowed. "I sent you a finished invention." "No. You sent me half a stolen one." The miners pressed closer. Whitcomb held up the soot. "This residue has your claimed stabilizer in it. Rare mix, not guessed at, not copied by a madwoman in the dark. It takes trial failure and a mind that knows how powder breathes." He turned toward the crowd. She cut a hangman's hinge from 40 yards and did not singe the man standing over it. "That is not luck. That is authorship." Eleanor's hand fell a little. Harlan's fingers closed around hers. Sterling's face went red. "You old fool. I own this valley." Whitcomb did not blink. "Not tonight." The soldiers stepped forward. Sterling grabbed for Buck's pistol. The white-bearded miner moved first. He struck Sterling's hand with a shovel handle, and the pistol skidded into the mud. The street surged. Men and women closed in with dead names behind their teeth. Whitcomb raised his hand. "Alive," he said. "He answers proper." The soldiers seized Sterling. His hat fell off. His watch chain snapped. Mud swallowed both. Buck tried to slip behind the feed store. Two miner widows stepped into his path. He stopped like he had met a walsall. The church bell rang once. Not warning now, just iron telling the mountain the order of things had changed. Whitcomb faced Eleanor and removed his hat. "Mrs. Hart, the army will hear your claim." Eleanor looked at the notebook, then at Sterling with his wrists bound, then at the faces that had spat at her in the road. No one asked her to cover her face. A boy near the trough pulled off his cap. Then a miner did the same. Then another. Harlan picked up Eleanor's shawl from the mud. He did not set it over her scars. He folded it once and laid it over her shoulders for warmth. She looked at him. "You still got that poor excuse for a roof leaks on the left." "I can mend left." He nodded toward Gallows Peak. "Then come on." Behind them, Sterling cursed until a soldier shoved him into silence. The crowd did not cheer. Some victories were too heavy for noise. Eleanor and Harlan stepped off the gallows together, crossed the square, and walked toward the road climbing north. At the edge of town, she took his hand first, and Ironclad Valley watched the two people it had tried to bury walk back toward the mountain like the world had finally